chapter 27. Chapter 27 was by far, has been by far, the most difficult chapter of the hundreds that we have translated. I'm very thankful for my committee's help on this. It took me days to get through it, working maybe several hours a day at least. It was a lot. Damien, would you like to read this chapter that you worked so hard on?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. When it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they gave custody of Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion named Julius of the Augustan cohort. Boarding a ship of Adramyttium that was about to sail to places along Asia, we put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius, treating Paul kindly, gave him permission to go to his friends and receive their care. From there, putting out to sea, we sailed leeward of Cyprus because the winds were contrary.
Now, in the fall, shipping pretty much slowed to a crawl and a stop in the winter because the winds on the Mediterranean are bad, and besides that, it's hurricane season. So they try to do all their sailing before late fall and winter come, because if they don't, they run into problems the way they ran in here. It's very late in the season. They're trying to beat the bad winds.
And after sailing across open water by Cilicia and Pamphylia, we put in at Myra of Lycia. And there, when the centurion had found the ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy, he boarded us on it. Sailing slowly for a number of days, we arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to go further. And then we sailed for Salmone under the lee of Crete. And with difficulty making our way past it, we came to a certain place called Fair Havens, near which lay a city called Lasea.
Yeah. Now notice that the centurion has rented space on this boat. This is a merchant ship, a large merchant ship, and the centurion and his soldiers, with their prisoners, have rented places, paid their fare. I mean, the centurion had to pay. He would have paid with the money from the emperor and the treasury. They're on a rented vessel. It's a large merchant vessel that had room for them.
But much time having passed, and the voyage now being unsafe because the fast had already come and gone, Paul urged them, saying to them, "Men, I sense that the impending voyage will be made with damage and much loss, not only to the cargo and ship, but also to our lives." But the centurion was won over by the shipmaster and the shipowner rather than the things spoken by Paul.
Well, they can't blame Paul then.
And as the harbour was not suitable for wintering, the majority gave counsel to set sail from there, that perhaps they could make Phoenix to winter there, a Cretan harbour facing southwest and northwest.
The island of Crete, you know which one it is over there? The one behind Song's Head. The port that we're talking about that faced southwest and northwest is on the left end of that island. It faces west, basically. And you see northwest and southwest from the end of that island, right between Song and Barber's Heads there. That's where they are. And all they got to do is make it from there to southern Italy. I mean, it looks like a short little voyage. So maybe they can zip in there before things get real bad, right?
Crete's the long, skinny one right over Ellen, right?
That's Cyprus.
No, that's
yeah,
Crete.
I'm not Song's Head. I thought it was Song's Head. There's Ellen's, between Barber and Ellen. I'm sorry, I thought it was Song. That's where Crete is. So it looks like a short little voyage. They just scoot right on in before bad weather really sets in.
And when a south wind blew gently, they weighed anchor and sailed along close to Crete, supposing they had accomplished their purpose.
Uh-oh.
But not long after, a fierce wind called Euroclydon blew in against it. And when the ship was caught up in it and could not withstand the wind, we gave way and were driven along. And running under the lee of a certain island called Clauda, we were barely able to bring the ship's boat under control.
And the boat was a boat that was on the ship. They lowered it down, to, for whatever reason. So this ship was big enough to have its own boat on the side.
Does lee mean coast?
Lee means opposite the wind, right?
Out of
That is, I think.
Well, in this case,
no,
it's
it's
south.
the
It's whatever, it has to do with the wind. In the springtime, the lee might be the north side. But yeah, this is running south of the islands, trying to get to Italy.
Yeah, usually they call it the windward or the leeward
Yeah,
side.
windward side or the leeward side. They don't want the windward side at this time of year. They want the leeward side so they make progress.
And when they had set it out, they used ropes to brace the ship. And fearing lest they run aground on the Syrtis,
Now the Syrtis is down on the Syrtis is quicksands. And there's a big area in the Gulf of Syrtis, which is northern Africa, down behind those seats there where they're sitting. And it's called the Syrtis Sands by some people. The Syrtis, instead of Syrtis, they call it quicksand. Sometimes a lot of ships were lost there, and they were afraid that this storm was blowing them into the Syrtis, where they'd be lost, for sure.
they lowered the kedge, and in this manner were moved along. But we being violently tossed by the storm, they soon began to jettison the cargo.
As I understand this kedge, let me try to explain what little I could understand it to mean. They lowered the boat, and the men rowed out to a certain space and threw an anchor down, and then they pulled the boat toward that anchor. That's the picture I got of it. And that kedge was the anchor that they threw down, that weight, where they could pull the boat against the wind to be saved from the quicksands. In other words, they were in a mess. And they were struggling hard to save the ship and the cargo and their lives.
And on the third day, we began to heave the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. But when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm beset us, all remaining hope of our being saved was beginning to fade. And when they had gone a long time without food, Paul then stood in their midst and said, Men, you should have followed my advice not to put to sea from Crete and incur this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to take courage, for not one of your lives will be lost, only the ship. But this night an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, stood by me.
Now he's not making this quiet little speech like we're reading here. But there's a hurricane going on. He's yelling this so they can hear him.
And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has given you all those who sail with you.
Praise God.
Such loveliness.
Yes.
It's so God didn't let. At the beginning he said, it's going to be a loss of life and cargo, but God, no. You're going to
I
survive.
thought about that when Paul said it's going to be a loss of life and ship
That would have
and
been hard.
heavy damage. And now he said, God has given me your lives.
So take heart, men, for I believe God, that it will happen just as it was told me. But we must run aground on a certain island. Now when the 14th night came, as we were driven across the Adriatic, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing some land. So they sounded, and they found 20 fathoms. And after they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found 15 fathoms. Then, fearing that perhaps we might run aground on rocks, they cast 4 anchors down from the stern and prayed for day to come. When some of the sailors set out to escape from the ship, lowering the ship's boat to the sea under pretext that they intended to drop anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.
Oh, my. You think they're gonna believe him now?
Yeah. At that, the soldiers cut the ropes to the ship's boat and let it drift off. The centurion had changed a bit.
Yes, he did.
When it was almost daylight, Paul urged everyone to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day you have looked for respite and continue without eating, taking nothing. Therefore I urge you to take food, for this is for your survival. And there will not fall a hair from the head of any one of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God before them all. And after breaking it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and took food themselves. We were in total 276 souls in the ship.
Those were pretty good sized, those ships.
Yeah.
And when they were filled with food, they began lightening the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight was come, they did not recognize the area, but they noticed a bay with a beach, onto which they decided to run the ship ashore, if possible. So slipping the anchors and leaving them to the sea, simultaneously loosing the rudder pendants, they hoisted the foresail to the wind and headed for the beach. But they ran the ship aground when they struck a point of land. The prow stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the stern was broken up by the force of the waves. And the soldiers' intention was to kill the prisoners so that no one could swim away and escape.
See, they'd have to forfeit their lives if the prisoners escaped, so let's just kill the prisoners.
But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. And then he commanded those who could swim to jump overboard first and head for shore. And then the rest, some on planks and some on pieces of the ship. And thus all was safely brought to land.
God gave all of them to Paul.
Paul had them eat. He
Yeah.
knew they were going to need energy
Yeah.
to get ashore. You know, we translate this, the fact that the ship stuck, but then the back broke up, gave the ones that couldn't swim something to hang on to. It's
Yes.
just,
It's just
it's just a
amazing.
lot of enemies.
That would be bad if God gave them all the call and then he killed Paul, then what are they gonna do?
Well, if the centurion figured out, yeah, I could have listened to you.
Centurions were level-headed characters. They were chosen to be centurions because they weren't fierce soldiers. They were thinkers. They could negotiate with the local population, didn't watch so they didn't provoke anybody, so they'd keep everything out of control. They were administrators as much as they were soldiers, maybe more so. So this centurion was a thinker. He was adding, you know, Paul said this and that happened, Paul said this and that. We better keep him alive. Okay.
And when it said prisoners, did he have more than Paul as a prisoner, or Paul's company was counted in?
No, they said the other prisoners in the beginning, Paul and the other prisoners. But Paul had some company that was allowed to be with